Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something, something we all grapple with, really. Why do some of our moral beliefs feel like absolute, unshakable truths,
hmm
while others, feel more like just our personal opinion?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. And, you know, philosophers have debated moral objectivity for centuries, obviously.
Right.
But today we're actually looking at it through a different lens, recent psychological research into how we as people actually experience this, how it
It
feels.
exactly. It's less about the big abstract, is there objective morality out there,
Yeah.
and more about, well, what makes a specific belief feel objectively true to you?
Right. And what's interesting is a lot of the earlier psych work focused on really extreme stuff,
Like robbery or assault, things everyone agrees on.
precisely. Things where the answer seems obvious. But this newer research digs into a much broader range of moral beliefs, the everyday stuff.
Okay, so the core question they're tackling is, do we see our moral beliefs as objective facts, kind of like scientific facts?
Like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, exactly. Or are they more like subjective preferences? I prefer jazz to classical.
That's the essence of it. And the researchers wanted to figure out what influences that feeling. Why does one belief feel like fact and another like opinion?
And they honed in on a couple of key things.
Yeah, two main
Hmm.
angles. First, the content of the belief itself, like what it's about. And second, how much we think other people agree with us on it.
Okay, let's dive in. What's the first big takeaway?
So the first really striking finding is about valence. Basically, whether the belief is about something good or something bad.
Okay.
It turns out that beliefs about negative actions, things we think are immoral, tend to feel more objectively true than beliefs about positive actions, the stuff we see as moral.
Huh. So stealing is wrong feels more like a fact than being generous is good.
Exactly that kind of thing. And it ties into this psychological concept called negativity dominance or negativity bias.
No, right, I've heard of that. The idea that bad stuff just hits us harder.
Yeah, precisely. Negative experiences, negative information, it often has a stronger psychological impact than positive stuff of like
Yeah.
equal intensity. You get 10 compliments and one
Right.
criticism.
And you fixate on the criticism? Yep, sounds familiar.
Well, it seems something similar might be happening with our moral beliefs.
So how did they see this in the research specifically?
Well, they had people rate statements. Things like stealing is wrong or vandalism is wrong, and then compare those to statements like donating to charity is important or being an environmentally conscious consumer is good.
And the wrong ones felt more objective.
Consistently, yes. People rated the beliefs about negative actions as feeling more objectively true.
No, wait, was it just that people agreed more strongly with the negative ones? I mean, maybe people just feel more certain that stealing is wrong than they do that charity is good.
That's a great question, and they controlled for that. They measured agreement levels separately from the feeling of objectivity.
Ah,
And even when agreement levels were similar, people felt just as strongly that charity is good as they felt that stealing is wrong. Stealing statements still felt more objectively factual.
wow. So the inherent badness somehow gives the belief an extra layer of perceived factualness.
It seems like it, that negativity dominance seems to bleed into our sense of moral reality, making the thou shalt nots feel more like fundamental truths than the thou shalts.
That's really counterintuitive in a way. Okay, so negativity is one piece. What was the other main factor they found?
The other big one is perceived social consensus. Basically, how much we think other people agree with our moral belief.
Right, okay. That makes sense on the surface. If everyone you know thinks something is wrong.
It starts to feel less like your opinion and more like just the way things are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like social proof for morality.
Exactly. It connects to basic social psychology.
Yeah.
We generally feel more confident in our beliefs when others share them. What this research adds is the idea that we might use this perceived agreement as a kind of mental shortcut.
A heuristic.
Yeah, a heuristic for judging objective truth. If a belief seems really widespread, maybe our brain flags it as, okay, this one's probably legit, probably objective.
So, did the study actually show a link? Did people who thought more others agreed also feel the belief was more objective?
Yes, a very strong correlation. The more consensus participants thought existed for a moral statement, the more objectively true that statement felt to them personally. It seems like a really powerful influence.
Okay, so bad things feel more objective, and things we think everyone agrees on feel more objective. Now, What happens when that feeling bumps up against reality? What about disagreement?
Ah, yes. This is where things got maybe a little surprising, perhaps even slightly unsettling.
Uh-oh, how so?
Well, you might think, philosophically speaking, that if you believe something is an objective truth, you'd be open to discussing it, right? Showing others the evidence, trying to reach the truth together.
Yeah, that seems logical. Like arguing about a scientific fact, you assume there's a right answer to be found?
Right. But psychologically, that doesn't seem to be what happens. The research found the opposite. The more objective a moral belief felt to someone.
The less okay they were with disagreement.
Exactly. The higher the perceived objectivity, the less comfortable people were with someone holding the opposing view.
That feels backwards. Why would that be?
Well, the study found that when people saw a moral belief as highly objective, they were significantly more likely to view someone who disagreed as simply being mistaken, not just having a different opinion, but being factually wrong.
Okay, so they dismiss the other person's view more easily.
Yes, and it went beyond just thinking they were mistaken. It had social implications too.
Like what?
They asked participants how willing they'd be to have someone who disagreed with them on certain moral issues as a roommate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there was a clear link. The more objective they felt the belief was, the less willing they were to live with someone who disagreed.
So that feeling of this is an objective truth might actually close us off, make us less tolerant, less open-minded.
That's what the findings suggest. It's a bit paradoxical. The stronger our conviction in the objective truth of our belief, the less open we might become to engaging with those who see it differently. It kind of pushes towards social distance rather than open debate.
Huh. That really gives you pause. Makes you think about those really passionate arguments you see. Okay, so tell us a bit about the studies themselves. How do they figure all this out?
Sure. So the first main study, study one, involved undergrads. They looked at different scenarios, some clearly moral, some not.
Right.
For the moral ones, they rated a few things.
Right.
How much they agreed with a statement about it, like action X is morally wrong. Then, crucially, how objective they felt that statement was.
And how did they measure objective? That sounds tricky.
They use a clever composite measure. It combined two questions. First, do you think there's one single correct answer to this moral question? And second, if someone disagrees with your answer, are they necessarily mistaken?
Got it. So high scores meant, yes, there's your right answer, and people who disagree are wrong. That's perceived objectivity.
Exactly. And they also asked participants to estimate how much the average person in the U.S. would agree with their stance.
Ah, that's the perceived consensus part.
Right. And finally, they asked about their comfort level with a hypothetical disagreeing person, including that roommate question.
Okay, so that laid the groundwork. You mentioned follow-up studies, too.
Yes, they did some follow-ups that tweaked the methods slightly, maybe used different scales or more direct ways to gauge perceived consensus, but they generally replicated the key findings,
Which were?
that negativity link bad actions feel more objective. And importantly, that link between perceived objectivity and being less comfortable, less tolerant of disagreement.
Okay. And then there was study two. What was different about that one?
Study 2 is really cool because it was experimental. Instead of just measuring existing perceptions, they tried to manipulate the perceived consensus.
How'd they do that?
They presented participants with moral scenarios, similar to before, but then they gave them fake feedback about how their peers supposedly felt about it.
Ah, so they'd tell some people, hey, pretty much everyone agrees with you on this, and others, actually, opinions are really split on this one.
Precisely. They created conditions of manipulated high consensus versus manipulated low consensus.
Sneaky. And then what did they measure?
They measured how surprised people were by the fake consensus info, how comfortable they'd be interacting with someone who disagreed, and the key outcome, how objective the moral issue felt to them after seeing the consensus feedback.
And did it work? Could they actually nudge people's sense of objectivity just by telling them others agreed?
Yes, it wasn't a massive effect, but it was statistically significant. People who were told there was high agreement rated the moral issue as slightly more objective than those told there was low agreement.
Wow. So just thinking other people agree can actually make a moral belief feel more like a solid fact in your own mind?
It really suggests that perceived consensus isn't just correlated with felt objectivity. It might actually be one of the ingredients that creates that feeling. Our sense of moral truth seems partly built on our perception of the crowd.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up then. What are the big takeaways for someone listening?
Well, I think there are two main things influencing that gut feeling of whether a moral belief is an undeniable truth. First, uh, It seems beliefs about bad things, about immoral actions, just naturally feel more objective to us.
Right, the negativity bias effect.
Exactly. And second, how much we think other people are on the same page as us. The more agreement we perceive, the more factual the belief feels.
And then there's that surprising, almost counterintuitive finding about disagreement.
Yeah, the stronger that feeling of objectivity gets, the less open we might actually be to differing views. We're more likely to just see dissenters as mistaken and maybe even want to distance ourselves.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? Maybe take a moment to consider a moral belief you hold really strongly, one that feels absolutely true to you.
Hmm.
Ask yourself, do I see this as an objective fact? And then reflect. Does the fact it's about something bad play a role? Does the feeling that everyone agrees play a role?
And maybe the most challenging part, how do I really react, when I meet someone who genuinely sees it differently? Does that feeling of objectivity make me less curious about their perspective?
It's definitely food for thought. Understanding these psychological tendencies, these sort of default settings in how we perceive morality.
That would be really valuable, couldn't it, for navigating our own convictions, but also for how we talk to each other, especially when we disagree on things that matter deeply.
Yeah. If our sense of objective truth is shaped by these subtle psychological factors, maybe that awareness can help us approach those difficult conversations with a little more humility, or at least curiosity.
That's a really interesting question to ponder. How do we foster more productive conversations across moral divides, knowing these psychological currents are at play? Something to definitely think about further.